Good to see everybody. We're continuing the book of Ezra. So the kind of last thing we saw was the end of chapter 6, when they finished building the second temple. I wanted to talk about this a minute because as I've been discussing these things are very relevant. They're brought in Jewish law in many areas of modern questions. So what happened was they finished building the second temple. And in chapter 6, verse 15, it says when they finished it on the third day of the month of Adar. It's a little bit before holiday of Karmi. And then they brought offerings. And there's a lot of different laws I can't get into right now about what offerings you could bring, what you can't. There's certain ones that are decreed, some you can't add. There were certain times they were allowed to bring some offerings now in the inauguration of the tabernacle because they still had prophets. So they had certain prophecies at the time that they could bring certain offerings to inaugurate the temple. But one thing that's fascinating here, the Malbim explains this unbelievable idea. He says that the inauguration went for 3 weeks, 21 days, from the 3rd of Adar till the 23rd of Adar, 3 weeks. And he explains an amazing thing, because remember, we have in the book of Ezekiel, the book of Yecheskel, it gives us the measurements of the third temple. So we actually know what to do. We know how the final temple will look and what it has to be. And there is a lot of discussion how the third temple comes about, because there are some texts that refer to it coming down supernaturally, which can mean it comes down totally miraculously, or as some people might understand it, it happens in through people, but happens in a very supernatural way. And this really is a central difference between the first temple and second temple that I've explained to you before. Because the first temple, in the time of Solomon, that happened, the whole story happened supernaturally. Jews came into the land of Israel with the story of Joshua, and it was miraculous in many ways how they took over the land and the things that happened there. We know the splitting of the Red Sea when they went into the desert. But crossing, if you look in the book of Joshua, crossing over into Israel, the Jordan dried up. Reading the book of Yehoshua, so there was miraculous things happening constantly. The story of Jericho, they surrounded Jericho and the walls sunk into the ground. So the first temple whole period, as we go into the building by King Solomon, it's happening in a miraculous way. There were actually 10 miracles that happened in the first temple on a daily basis. Imagine seeing a world where you're seeing miracles. It's unbelievable. If you live in a world where constantly, even the place of the ark, it was beyond time and space. It didn't fit into the space it was supposed to be. It was too big. And the Talmud says that was a constant miracle to show that the temple was outside of the normal laws of nature. The second temple was not that way. And I want to just explain this here because why not? The answer is really what it says, because even though Ezra was worthy, but the people were not on the level now that they merited to have a supernatural system going through the story of the second temple. And ladies and gentlemen, this is really what you look in the world today, because they had to come on to the king of Persia. Please let us go, all the stories. That is, in a certain sense, what's called a chil Hashem. It's a disgrace that it has to be that way, that we have to go through it not being revealed. But the second temple was not built in a way that it looked like it was so to speak, the generosity of the king. Though it wasn't, though the king realized it was a prophecy they would return after 70 years and all that story. Even the most incredible, subtle miracle, which I'm going to get into a little bit today, but the king who finally gives the okay. Remember, the first Koresh was the one who said that they can go back. Then he got nervous, politics. He said, oh, hold off. And then it stayed unbuilt, the temple, for 18 years. Then what happened was the prophet Haggai and Zechariah told the people, don't wait for the Persians to say, okay, God told me to tell you to go and build it. They start building it. And then as we saw last time, what happened was the enemies of the Jews came back and said, hey, what are you doing here? And the Jews said, we are servants of God, and we are building the temple. And it said there, and you can go and ask the king if it's okay, because we're doing this. And even the text says, this is back in chapter 5, verse 5, it says the eyes of God were on the people. And God, in other words, this is now happening as a hidden miracle, because beforehand they came, they stopped the Jews, and they got the king to stop it also. Here, the Jews said, we're building it. The prophets told them to build it. And this is who we are. We're the servants of God who created heavens and earth. And if you don't believe us, go ask the king. And when they asked the king said, yeah, he found the original document that Koresh had written, and he said, build it. But it means that it was happening in a more natural way with these miracles. So the second temple is built in a more natural way. So the Malbim is an amazing thing here. He says that what happened was when they inaugurated the temple, the second temple, on the third day of Adar, they had a tradition, they knew the third temple would be inaugurated on the 23rd of Adar, 20 days, 21 days if you count the day itself. And so therefore, they kept the process of the inauguration going because they were hoping they would merit and it would become the third temple. Now, how that would look, I don't know. How the third temple would then be some sort of supernatural way coming down and combine with their own efforts, I don't know how that would look. But it's an amazing idea. In other words, they were aware the second temple was a being done in the world of nature, and they were aware that there was a third temple, but they also knew that if they merited, this could have been it. And ladies and gentlemen, that's really what happens in our lives. We don't really know, the prophets, people ask the prophecies of Mashiach coming. But again, we have free will, so we can make it, and God will make it happen according to prophecy if we use our free will properly. So they realized that even though the second temple now was going under the guise of nature, the king said you can go. Okay, and now they didn't stop us and all the things. But they realized that if they really repented and they did this properly, this could have turned into the third temple. That's what the Malbim says, where they lengthened the time of the inauguration, hoping they would merit, and somehow this would turn to the third temple. I don't know if it would come down from the heavens or somehow supernaturally it would turn into the temple that will last forever. That's not what happened. The second temple did not merit it. And ladies and gentlemen, it's a fascinating thing you should understand. The temple, the people who established the second temple were called the men of the Great Assembly. There were 120 sages that established the laws. And it's a fascinating thing because the Israeli parliament is called the Knesset. It's not the same thing at all because, there are some righteous people there, but it's whoever it is. But they made it 120 people to sort of imitate the 120 sages that re-established the Second Commonwealth and the Second Temple. That's why it's 120 people in the Parliament of Israel. It's called the Knesset, the gathering. But it's not the same level. The 120 people there were all great sages who established the Second Temple. And by the way, they knew, because they realized this temple was not going to last. They knew the third temple will be the one that the prophet Ezekiel talks about. So they set up a lot of the things in Jewish law today that have gone and helped us throughout the exile. Because really, I'll give you an example. In Jewish law, for example, the idea of the way we have prayer that Jews pray 3 times a day is not necessarily a Torah law. The Torah law is to pray. But the structure of Jewish prayer was set up by these 120 leading sages, including prophets, because they knew that even though the temple was rebuilt now, they knew the temple wasn't going to, this second temple was not going to last forever, and that we're going to face a long exile. That's what happened. So now we finished the second temple. Great. We've been brought back to the land of Israel. It happens in a somewhat of a natural way. And they're hoping it's going to turn to the third temple. They did not merit that. And what happened was the leaders, the sages of the period of time really knew this temple was eventually going to be destroyed and will be the third temple will be later, as was the design of Ezekiel. Chesed describes in prophet exactly what the third temple will look like, and that will be in the future. And this was a period of transition where the second temple lasted for 420 years, but it was eventually destroyed, and the Jews went into this long exile. Which, ladies and gentlemen, it's like funny because it's all of my life, it's all of your lives. Hopefully the Mashiach will come today. But what happened was the first exile was only 70 years, which was a long time. So we had the temple exile for 70 years. This last exile, is in the book of Daniel, talks about is the long exile, the exile of Rome. And this is one that's been going for very long. And when this is finally done, that will be the ultimate time, and that will be the third temple, which will last forever. Okay, so now the temple is built, the second temple is built. And now in chapter 7, Ezra, who we said was the leading sage, one of the leading sages, he did not leave Babylon to build the temple. We said before, because his teacher was still alive. His teacher's name was Baruch ben Neriah. He was the student of Jeremiah, of Yirmiyah the prophet, and he had to learn from his rabbi. He was an old man. He couldn't go and learn from him. Just understand, this is a very arduous journey to walk, essentially, from Iran to Israel. This is not like, today you're going to pop on a plane, you're going to fly over. You're basically walking, and it's very dangerous with animals and bandits and everything else. So his teacher couldn't go, and Ezra, therefore, did not go to build the temple. But when it was time for him, he passed away, it was time for him to go, and that was a year after the temple was built. That's the beginning of chapter 7. So the beginning of chapter 7, Ezra is ready to go, and he goes to the king of Persia, Darius, who, as I said to you, another hidden miracle. I mean, according to most understandings, he is the son of Achashverosh and Esther, which means he's Jewish. Imagine that. It's like the politics that must have been going on. Hey, why is he letting the Jews go back? Self-Jewish. So that's an incredible thing. So now Ezra goes to Darius and says, I want to go back to the land of Israel and strengthen it. Ezra, the beginning of chapter 7, he gives his genealogy, traces himself back to Aaron. He was a Kohen from Aaron. And that's what Ezra was doing a lot. He's throughout the book of Ezra, he is clarifying the genealogy. Anyone intermingled, we didn't know if they were Jewish or they were Kohanim. He was making sure as they returned to Zion that everything was going to be done properly. So he asked the king about going back, and the king gives him a free hand. And the king basically sends money, support, tells Ezra, he writes for him that he can show his letter to anyone. They won't pay taxes in Transjordan. They go over to the land of Israel. They'll be protected. Everyone should give them things, give them offerings, give them gold and silver to bring to the temple of God. So Darius, the king, gets very into Ezra going and establishing the temple and beautifying it and glorifying it. Not only that, this is crucial now. He tells that Ezra should go And read to you here. You should go check on the Jewish people in Jerusalem and then make sure they are keeping the religion of the Torah properly. So the king is not just interested in the temple, he's interested in knowing Ezra is the great sage, and he wants Ezra to strengthen their commitment to the Torah and to God. Okay. Ezra then gets the people together. Okay. And after the king writes him this incredible support, he thanks God in the end of chapter 7 that he put in the king's heart to do this, to glorify the temple in Jerusalem. He recognizes it's from God. It's not, it's not just it's a nice king. He recognizes it. Okay. Now he gathers the people. And then in chapter 8, he lists all the people. We have to know who they are, and they do the service. After he gathers them, he sees he's missing the Levites. Levites he needs. Levites were part in the temple. He sends a message to Edo, who was a important person, to send him some Levites that he needs, and he gets these wise Levites who will go with him on this journey from Persia to Babylon, Persia area, to the land of Israel. Now, in chapter 8, verse 21, he calls for a fast. Why does he call for a fast? That God should provide a straight path for them to be able to get to the land of Israel safely. And verse 22 is amazing. He says, chapter 8, verse 22, he boasted, I was embarrassed to ask the king for protection. Why is he embarrassed to ask the king for protection? I told the king, explained to the king, that the hand of God, God protects all of those that are righteous. So how could I go and ask the king for protection? Now, this is a very interesting thing, because the law is that if you're going on something that's very, very dangerous, you're not supposed to rely on a miracle. A person doesn't go and walk into a battlefield with there's bullets shooting around and say, okay, I'll be protected. Even a righteous person, if something called a clear and apparent danger, there are natural means you need to protect. Ezra knew there really was great danger. He knew the Samaritans who really had tried to be against them were already coming to plot to kill him. He knew that he was in danger, but he understood, as I told you before, even though this was not going to be done in the revealed miracle way as the first temple, Ezra said this has to be done in the hidden miracles, and he's not going to rely on the king. And he's going to fast and pray to God that even though this journey is very dangerous, the enemies know he's coming, that God should protect him. And he prays and calls a fast day, and that's what happened. And essentially, based on that, he arrives in Jerusalem safely. Okay, fantastic. Okay, they arrive in Jerusalem for a few months to get there, and then they arrive 3 days. On the 4th day, they dedicate the things that the king had sent and everyone had sent to the temple, and they bring various offerings. Okay. Now, in verse 9, this is what I want to get to today. In verse 9, in chapter 9, I'm sorry, Ezra now is going to the temple, and what happens is that he is told by the officers that Jewish people have strayed. Because you have to understand, they're coming from Babylon. They're now in a hostile area. There are the enemies of Israel around. They're a small group. I don't even know how many women actually went up because it was a very arduous journey. And what happened was that many, list those, there were those amongst Jewish people who were intermarried. Okay. And what happens is, when Ezra hears this, he rips his clothes, he fasts, he cries, and he essentially has a long prayer of how could the Jews do this. And at the end of this prayer, explaining how what happened, God was giving us a redemption kind of land of Israel, and these people have now married the daughters of the idolaters of the nation that they're amongst them. How could that be? And what happens is the people say to Ezra, yes, we have done this, and we are going to fix it. And stay with what you are decreeing on us, because we are going to follow the Torah. Ezra calls a gathering. He says, whoever doesn't come the next 3 days will have their property repossessed. And people come and they cry, and they see Ezra crying, and they cry. And they agree to separate from their heathen wives. And that's really how the book ends. That essentially the people agree to this, and that's what happened. It takes them a little time. It says it takes a little bit of time to get this done, and they give a date by the 1st of Nisan. A few months later, it has to be done, and it is done. And in the end, the people all reaffirm their commitment to God. Now, I want to get into this a little bit, because this is, especially, I mean, we're mostly here, and we have some people that are Jewish here, we have Noahides, we have people from different backgrounds, and I think it behooves us to discuss this a little bit. But why can the Jews not marry anyone who's not Jewish? As a matter of fact, the sages say that this creates anti-Semitism. It certainly does. If the Jewish people are separate from the world, that creates anti-Semitism. Every nation, when you come to a place, you're supposed to go and become part of the culture. That's what they do. And then they say, okay, Jewish people, by the fact that God commanded them to separate, and the laws of kosher and laws of, then it creates a distance. Is this good? Is this not good? That's one thing I want to discuss. Because Ezra is like, this can't happen, and the people realize it, and they cry, and they. Now, I want to say something else I want to discuss with you, which is I don't have an answer to this. I want to share with you my thinking about this. But what's fascinating to me is that Ezra does not tell the women to convert. And that's interesting, because the custom today in most Jewish courts that we have is that if we think the couple is right for each other and the woman wants to convert, let her convert. So why do we sort of do that today? That's I've served on numerous courts, conversion courts, and that's kind of the custom. So not the custom, but it's okay. How come that was not an option for Ezra? Okay, I want to explain this. This is very important. So, first of all, in Jewish law, there was always concern somebody was converting for the sake of marriage. Okay, and that wouldn't be okay, because if this is what you need to do, and this is who you are, then you should convert. If it's not who you are, then you shouldn't do it. We're talking about everyone's got to keep the 7 Noahide laws. Not everyone has to convert. So if a person feels that they are a Noahide, they are someone who is not meant to be Jewish, they should not convert. If they're converting for the sake of somebody else for a marriage, that's invalid, because they're not doing it for themselves. I got to tell you this story. I mean, I've never done this. This is, I'm going to tell you a story is like crazy. I don't know if it's really a true story. Um, but I don't know if I have the guts to do this, but I heard about a certain rabbi who did this. And if he did it, good for him, because the story happens to go that, and I don't know who the rabbi was, but there was a couple that were both converting. And in the conversion process, they have to go to a mikvah, to a ritual bath, and they go into the bath. And that's one of the steps of the conversion is to go into the mikvah. So the way the story is, this rabbi went, I don't know if it's true. The idea is true. He went to each one. He went to the wife, because they were both not Jews, they were both converting, and said, your husband backed out. Because when the person's about to go into the mikvah, they ask him certain questions. The husband backed out. And he went to the husband and said, your wife backed out. He said, you still want to do this? I don't know if this story is true because it's really kind of cruel. And also, you can't lie. So I don't know. But the idea that the person then said, wait a minute, I got to do this no matter what. It's an incredible, test. Yeah. And the way the story goes, they both said, well, this is who I am. And that's how they knew they weren't doing it for any other system. So I know that story is true, but the concept is true that if someone does it for marriage, then it's not who they are. And it's a problem because it's got to be you. As we've talked about with Noahides many times, the idea, as the Gemara says, if someone keeps the 7 Noahide laws in a certain way, they're comparable to the Kohen Gadol. Talmud says why? Because they're doing their purpose. If your purpose is if a person is not born Jewish, they don't have to convert. They have to do what they have to do. If the person is meant to be Jewish, that's who they are, it's who their soul really is, then they should go forward with that. But if for ulterior motives, that can't be, because then it's living a lie. Okay, that's one level. The second level I want to talk about is very, very hard for me to say. But I really think that it's important to understand. Because, like, I've dealt with a lot of cases of, let's say, one person who's Jewish, one person wasn't, and they wanted to convert, and trying to figure out where they're coming from. In the story of Ezra, there doesn't seem to be that option. I mean, maybe there were some people that said, no, we want this, but there's something that in Ezra's case, it seems like no. So I want to explain something. And it's difficult because the root of anti-Semitism really is the idea of a chosen people in itself creates the idea of anti-Semitism. And I'll prove it to you. Because it says that Joseph had brothers. The brothers were very righteous, but they felt that the father chose Joseph over them. And that created them in a very negative feeling. So when you see people that are Jew haters, the root of that is wait a minute, what does that mean that the chosen people are? What does that mean? And this is important to say because being a righteous Noahide has two components to it. One is the component of doing the mitzvah, and the second is to attach to the Jewish people. So I got to explain this because we live in a world today that many Jews don't know what it is like to be Jews. And even the great sages of today are not the same thing as the great sages as the past generation. We have a concept in the Torah. the further we get away from Mount Sinai, every generation gets lower. I heard from my rabbi once, said, you'll never understand the generation that I saw, the sage that I saw. And same thing goes afterwards. They had there was it's kind of a joke that they had this story, but there was a story about a Jewish guy on the plane, and he was sitting next to another person who wasn't Jewish, and it was an old man. The Jewish guy was an old man. And they're both older fellows, and the grandson of the Jewish guy was on the plane, and the grandson came over to the grandfather and was treating him. He was treating him with tremendous respect. Like, wow, which is the way it's supposed to be. So this other guy wasn't Jewish, was sitting next to him, and he was like taken aback because like he felt his grandkids are like, hey, you don't know how to go on the computer. What's He said, I don't understand. How come they honor you so much? He said like this. This is the way the story goes. He says to them, listen, we believe that we come from Isaac and Jacob, back to the giving of Torah, Mount Sinai, and Moshe. So every generation and 2 generations back is closer to that moment of giving the Torah to Moses. You, sir, believe you come from a monkey. So every generation back, you're going close to a monkey. Now, it's a very harsh thing, but you don't want to believe in a concept that, we were. No, a person wants to understand that they have a certain greatness in them, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, and they have to understand that greatness is not going back to a monkey. So what happens is that in every generation, the generations get lower and lower and lower. But the reality is that when God took the Jewish people out of Egypt, and you just read the story there, that God gave a Torah to Moshe. Moshe doesn't eat for 40 days and 40 nights. He sees the future. When it's time for him to die, he goes and dies. But it says in the text, it says, God said to Moshe, okay, go die. It was up to him. So we have people in the past who were prophets. There were over 1 million prophets in the Jewish world. Understand this. Even though the Torah talks about a certain number, that's the prophecies that were for generations. But there were over 1 million prophets. There were schools of prophecy. So what happened was when God took the Jewish people out, he gave them an assignment that was supposed to and is transformative in what they were supposed to be. I'm not saying I'm that, and I'm not saying, but that was the objective. And the fact that there were millions of prophets and people who were eating the manna from the heavens and who could see the future and the past. And that was what God's job was for the Jewish people. And I think that's what happened with Ezra. Ezra said, wait a minute, this is a couple thousand years ago. We were so close to the temple 70 years ago. We had these miracles that we were seeing, that the whole nation was elevated, and you forgot who you are? I don't understand. How could you forget who you are? If the women they married were genuine converts, they would have converted because they said, listen, look at the miracles that are happening to your people. But they weren't. They were people who were people in the land. And there's a famous Hasidic story. It goes, I think I've shared with you once. It's a famous story of Rabbi Nachman. He says that one time there was a king who his son lost his mind, and he thought he was a turkey, and he was underneath the table like a turkey. And they brought psychologists in, they brought the philosophers, they brought everyone to try to get the kid to stop being a turkey. But the kid wouldn't. He said, the turkey, he was under the table, he took his clothes off and under the table, So they didn't know what to do. So they brought the rabbi. So the story is the rabbi goes, says, okay, I'll go on the table too. Goes on the table. The kid says, what are you doing here? I'm also turkey. Really? Yeah, I'm a turkey too. He starts going around and he starts acting like a turkey. The rabbi's picking up the food like the kid. Then the rabbi turns to him and says, even though we're turkeys can wear clothes. Really? Turkeys wear clothes? Yeah, turkeys wear clothes. But, even though we're turkeys could actually sit at the table. Turkeys could sit at the table? Yeah, they could sit at the table. Even though we're turkeys could eat with a knife and a fork. And slowly he goes into the kid's world and he brings him out of it by elevating him without fighting with the concept that he was stuck in until he realized not turkey. So what happened was Ezra saw that the people who were God's chosen people who were having miracles done for them left and right, they thought they were turkeys. They forgot what they were. And that's why it was such a serious offense. You see, there's two things here. There is, you have to know who they were, and who were these people they married. They were called Boel Bat El Nechar. They were heathen. They were people who were not elevated people. There were people who were serving various gods, and that's what they were. Weren't people who were genuinely elevated to connect with. I think very often what happens now, and this is what I see when I have a couple who one is Jewish and one is not Jewish, and one wants to convert. Very often what happens is, my experience is, the one who's Jewish did forget they were Jewish, but the one who's not Jewish has a Jewish soul, and therefore is the one who has to remind the Jew who he is, his job. And that's what I found very often. That's why I think today the custom is to obviously check that they want to convert properly, but because that we're not living on the level that we were back in the time of Ezra, where there was supernatural things happening. So when that happens, so many Jewish people today forget who they are. They don't know what they are. And there are people amongst the nations who have a high soul, and they have to bring that person back. I've seen that many, many times. So what happened in the story of Ezra, and this is what I want to share with you, because reading the text, it sounds offensive. It sounds offensive. And you're married to. So, but what I really want to share with you is because I don't want it to come across that individually, I myself, someone else saying, "Oh, I'm this." No, I'm a little rabbi, and I'm not claiming to be able to do any of the things that we talked about. But the role of the Jewish people is to be the ones to bring God in the world in a supernatural way. And therefore, it's a crucial part of being a Noahide is to want to be nilveh to this, to want to support, to want to be part of this. Again, it's very fair, meaning that if somebody wants to convert, they can convert. They don't have to convert. There is no requirement. And as we say, if somebody comes to me and says they want to convert, we try to dissuade them. We say, no, not born Jewish, we don't see a reason to do that. We see that there's a beauty you could bring out by keeping the 7 Noahide laws. That's true. And that's why there's no obligation to. But I do think it's important to understand that the Jewish people were not supposed to be just, these guys do this. No, Jewish people were supposed to be, and eventually supposed to be, the conduit that God is using to bring out a supernatural system in the world, where it's very, very clear that there are people who were eating manna, people who are prophets, people are doing that. And if a person is a Noahide, in addition to keeping the laws that are intrinsic to their own self, it's important to want to be part of that process, even if that's not the role that any individual takes. And that's what I think happened with Ezra. I think in time of Ezra, what happened was he said, listen, we were doing supernatural things very, very, very recently. And how is it that, like you don't understand that you have this specific mission? The world has changed to a certain degree, and we're farther away. And the Jewish people, even though, I got to tell you, there's certain people that I have seen, certain rabbis that I have seen that, I shake in front of. They're not really on the internet. You can't find them, but there are, and compared to the generation before, they would shake in front of those, and compared to the generation before, they'd shake in front of those. And going back to Moshe, who was the head rabbi of the Jewish people, the Moshe Rabbeinu is called Moshe, our teacher. So Moshe, as we know, Michelangelo kind of had it wrong when he made the horns, right? Jews don't have horns. Why did he do that? Because it says he had beams of light coming out of his face. They couldn't look at him. Could you imagine a person walking around having to wear a mask because beams of light shooting out of his face and you can't look at him? That's not supposed to be an aberration. That's supposed to be an indication. So I'm trying to explain here. It's like what happened was at Mount Sinai was when God spoke to the Jewish people, they heard the first commandments and they couldn't handle it anymore. And then at a certain point, they heard God speaking to Moshe. So through Moshe, they couldn't maintain the level of hearing God's voice without dying, literally dying. And what happened was they had to hear it through Moshe, but Moshe was the ability to be the leader, but to be the leader amongst the people. He wasn't out of it; he was amongst it. He was elevating the people, and the people had to be on that to stride that supernatural level. And that's something that is Rat Hashem, God willing, where the world goes towards. And I think this is really important because I know we learned the book of Ezra, and I didn't want to hide around the idea that he says it and it seems to be insulting. It's not meant to be insulting. But I think it's important for Jews to understand what they're supposed to be, and even for everyone to understand that. Again, I'm not saying that I could do it, but it's supposed to be that it's supposed to be a nation that when God took them out, by giving them this responsibility, they were transcending the normal rules of nature. And if a prophecy was supposed to be a very real thing, and this is where the world goes. In the book of Ezekiel, it says that after the Mashiach comes, the Mashiach's Torah, the Jews will come to another prophetic level. So I don't say this in any way to make. I don't say this to be obnoxious, and I don't say this to push anyone. I say it as an important aspect for everyone who's a righteous Noahide to want to connect to the Jewish mission, to be part of that, and it's a real thing. But unfortunately, sometimes Jews forget who they are and think they're Turkey. Okay, good. But when they realize what they're supposed to be and their job, the nations of the world do their mission also, and they say, I want to be involved in this, and wherever it goes, that's what it is. That's what happened with Ezra. The people realized that they had forgot what they were, and they were breaking away from their unique mission, and they all cry and they say, we got it. And they realized who they were. And that's what Ezra did. He brought them to realize their role, their mission. Okay? So that's my thoughts. I'm happy to elaborate and explain on it more, but I kind of need to hear from everybody because, what I just said was maybe a little bit, I don't know, wasn't offensive to anyone, I just kind of felt it's important to say it because I love teaching you guys, and I'm glad I love teaching you guys, and I think you're all amazing, and I love God's creations, and everyone's got is made in the divine image. I don't want that to be misunderstood, but there is a requirement for the Jewish people, and it's a very fascinating requirement because sages talk about it that we are set up for anti-Semitism in that sense because by saying oh, I can't eat your food, that creates a distance. It literally does, and it's not unintentional on God's part. But the point is that there are two kinds of responses to that. The response of the evil people is let's get these people because I hate them. The response of the righteous people is saying, well, I want to be connected to them. I want to be part of them. And in whatever way that is. Doesn't mean need conversion. Person can. No. I mean, it's like a funny thing. I always tell people, in that sense, Torah is the most accepting. In other religions, if you don't believe, if you don't become, a Christian or a Muslim, you're going to hell. That's not what we say at all. We say that every single person can have a portion in the world to come if they act righteously. There is no such thing as, by the way, the whole term Judaism is misnomer. There's no term Judaism. There's no religion. There is one God who told all of his people to act righteously. Jews have these commandments. Everyone else has those commandments. There is no such thing as Judaism is a term that, it's taken from the tribe of Judah. It's not, they don't thought of Judaism. It's not a religion. It's like, this is what God said, how we all have to act. Jews have to act, non-Jews have to act, and that's what it is. So it's very, very fair in that way. If somebody wants to take on that tremendous responsibility, they are allowed to. We don't say, no, you don't have. And if someone says, I don't want to, I want to keep the 7 Noahide laws, have a portion of the world to come, then we say, wonderful, great, beautiful. But what I wanted to get through today was this concept, because it behooves us to really to say, if that's true, if God chose these people and he wanted these supernatural things to come out, as we've heard about in the Torah, so I want to be part of that. I don't want to be threatened by that and fear that and push that and make up different rationalization. And ladies and gentlemen, and this is basically what I want to end this thought with this. That's what's going on in this world right now. The world's very, very messed up. And what I talked to you about last week was I wanted you to a little bit to see through some of the lies of what's going on, because the lies that are being told are so fascinating. You just really need to understand what is happening to see through these lies, because they are. And I wanted you to understand that. I told last week about the political ramifications, to realize what's happening. But there's another thing that I want you to understand from this week conclusion. Sometimes when I hear a news story and I don't know what's true yet because they're telling you what they're telling you, but there's another gauge that I have. When you see that the people are people who thereby hate the Jewish people, Torah says that's a sign they're fighting against God. So what happens is, it's like, and people bringing political. And I said to you last week, it's an amazing thing. In America, we always felt America was on the side of right. Now you start to think about it, you say, wait a minute. If the agenda that America is pushing is an agenda that's counter to the 7 Noahide laws, then I start to wonder, wait a minute, what side do you want? Are you on the side of right or not? And so there is another mechanism that we have to understand. Besides for what we're being told, look at the response, how they relate to the land of Israel, Jewish people. If they're people pure heart, and they say, I want to be part of that. But if they're not, then what you'll find is you're going to find a lot of stories about things, a lot of politics, but the root of it is breaking away from Hashem, thereby from his people.